Hello, everyone. My name is Brian DeRosa. I joined Dean Dorton as part of the merger from DeRosa Mangold Consulting. So some of you I know, some of you are meeting me for the first time. Excited to continue working with you guys and help you solve problems. Today, my session is on practical support tips. Um, so we're going to be going over how to use Sage Intacct Help and the resources provided by Sage. Um, Talk about submitting tickets to Dean Dorton and how to do that efficiently for everyone involved. And then I've just got a list of some common Sage Intacct questions. Some of them are not so common, some of them are just interesting, and I wanted to talk about them. Um, you might wonder why the first objective is here. Isn't that what we're here to do, right? Answer all your questions. Uh, my philosophy on support is education first, because the fastest way to solve your problem is to usually know the answer in the first place. That being said, we're of course always happy to help you out whenever you have any questions. Um, we are going to be doing CPE questions here, so I'll put this back up on the screen. Can participate in this by texting 22333 and putting a response into the text, or by going to the Poll EV website. Use Dean Dorton to join. Up here for a couple of seconds in case anyone needs to log back in. All right. So using Intacct Help. I love the Intacct Help and Support. I think it's very detailed. They did a really good job with it. It might be the best help and support I've seen in a software. You know, I haven't seen everything, but I really like the help and support, and I highly recommend using the help on this page feature. This is, I would say, on maybe like 95% of all the pages inside of Intacct. And it basically just takes you to a help page dedicated directly to whatever it is you're looking at the time. Um, I'm going to pop out here and just kind of show you what I'm talking about. Up here in the right-hand corner, you have help and support. And let's go, act like we're adding an AP bill here. I can click help and support here, click help on this page. And it takes me straight to a whole help session created on creating an AP bill. Can scroll down and see what all the fields are looking for on this page. And you can do that, like I said, on most pages that you'll find in Intacct. There's also just the Help Center here. If you open that up, you've got a lot of stuff. Linda was touching on a few of these, right? You can get to the release notes from here. You can get to the community straight from here. There's a video library. You can also just type in something into the search window here, and it'll give you some search results um, that you can click on and take a look at. So lots of useful stuff. I really like it. Second resource I was going to talk about is the Intacct community. Um, Highly recommend making an account with the Intacct community. Uh, it's kind of a less formal knowledge base. So if like help and support is the formal knowledge base that Intacct provides you, uh, this is like kind of tribal knowledge sort of things. You'll find stuff that doesn't really have to do with Intacct at all, or just workaround type things, right? So if there's something that Intacct doesn't directly address, but some like a client has asked a question before, Intacct will make a kind of tribal knowledge article on it. And if you search for stuff, you can go find it. This is the URL if you want to go make an account. I will note uh, you will need a customer ID number, which you may not know. So if you want to create an account and it's asking for that and you don't know what that is, just feel free to reach out to us and we can help you get that. Um, so you can create an account. But just real quick, I'll show you what it looks like. Um, like I said, there's a lot of stuff here. There's a search up here that you can look for knowledge base articles. There's discussions. So if you have a question that you just want to ask the whole community, you can ask the community here. Here's ideas. This is a really cool thing. If the answer to your question is sorry, Sage Intacct doesn't do that yet, you can go either create an idea or vote for them here. So if your idea has already been submitted, you can go upvote it if you think it's a good idea. Um, so yeah, community is a really cool place. Highly recommend just creating an account to see what's there. And the last place I want to point out is the Sage Intacct status page, or rather Sage status page, because it's on all of the Sage products. Um, really recommend bookmarking this. It provides status information for every Sage product. It tracks cases when services are unavailable. Um, status.sage.com is the URL here. Uh, recommend bookmarking that, and I'll show you what that looks like. Looks like there's currently a partial outage for France for the Sage Business Cloud Bureau. If you scroll down here, there's drop downs for the different regions. So if we look at North America, you can just see over here whether or not it's operational. Um, so if you're ever, you know, having trouble logging into Sage Intacct, or if your reports are taking longer than you would expect to load, this is definitely a good place to start the troubleshooting process. If this says that everything's okay, um, then it could be on your internet side or maybe your computer. Um, or it could also be that it's like early minutes of the issue happening, right? This is not an immediate update. They update this when they know there's a problem. So um, I highly recommend when you're having problems like that, check the status page. Also check the community. You might see someone complaining about your same problem here. Uh, that way you know you're not alone. All right. So first question coming up here. Um, do you use Sage resources before opening a case? So any of those resources that I just discussed, um, do you take a look at those first, or do you just file a case? How do you feel about them? Do I need to do something to show the responses here?
If you hover over the bottom, there should be a little bubble that pops up.
I'm
All
not seeing
right.
it.
I have heard that uh, that slide does not appear to be working. So let me pull it up on my screen.
All right. Um, give it a few more seconds to get responses in. Glad to see that people are finding them useful and using them. That's always good to see. It's always good to gauge these sorts of things just to see where people are coming from whenever cases come in. Um, to those not using them, I highly encourage it. If you didn't know about it, it's good we have this session then. Um, yeah, we'll give it a few more seconds and then move on. It looks like it's slowing down. Thank you, everyone. Um, share my screen here. All right. So let's talk about submitting tickets to us. The email that you should be submitting tickets to is erpsupport@ddaftech.com. Um, and a few tips that I recommend for this, provide screenshots whenever relevant. Uh, the idea here is we want to make things as efficient as possible, right? Um, you don't want to have to, email in a question and then we have to ask a follow-up question and it just goes back and forth, asking questions over and over, right? Um, that's that's not to say we're not going to get the problem solved, but it's just in your interest to make things go as fast as possible. Any information you can provide would be useful. So screenshots are really useful. If you receive an error message on the in-text screen, there's a show details button that you can click to get the full error message. Highly recommend that whenever you're taking a screenshot of an error message. Um, Provide the steps that you're taking to produce the error. One of the first things we always try to do whenever we receive a question in, if we don't really know what's going on, is just go try to do the thing that the client is doing and see if it happens to us. If it doesn't happen to us, that means it's either a configuration issue or or maybe we're missing a step, right? Maybe there's something that we're not thinking about, and we can go from there. Other important information is top level versus entity level. This is sometimes useful for very specific scenarios, but if you're entering a transaction and you're getting an error message, uh, just let us know, hey, I'm doing this at top level, or it's at this entity, and then include the entity name. That just helps again with ruling things out. And then also, if you're doing an order entry or a purchasing transaction, it's important to provide the transaction definition. This also just gives us more information. If it's something specific with that transaction definition, this is really useful. I do want to show you uh, that show details button. Go back to my intact instance here. So let's say I'm entering in a bill, pick office supplies here. And I'm going to leave the location blank because the location is always required. I'll hit the submit button and we get an error message. So if you send an error message of this, I'm going to have no idea what's going on, right? It doesn't tell you anything. It just says information is missing. Um, if you provided a screenshot of the bill, I'd be able to figure out that the location is missing and that's always required. So that might be what's wrong, right? But if the location isn't on the screen, let's say you edited your entries layout and threw location down here. Well, now when you take a screenshot, location's not going to be on there. So I'd have to kind of take a guess, right? Um, so, oh, so let me just redo this. So if you click show details, it just gives you a better error message. It says location is empty. Very clear what's going on here. We need to provide a location, right? So highly recommend, like in this instance, the way I would recommend filing a case is take a picture of this error message and then say, hey, I went to create an AP bill, uh, maybe mention it was for this vendor and uh, maybe what account it's going to. If you're talking about like 10 plus accounts, you don't have to type all that out. Maybe just take a screenshot instead, right? Um, and of course, if you don't provide that, we'll just ask the question anyway. This isn't, a rule. It's more of just a guideline to make things fast and easy for everyone. So next portion is going to be talking about common questions and answers. Um, One of the most common questions I get is, why is my import failing? Um, and of course, this is a really broad question, right? This has to do with all the objects in intact. So I tried to be just as general as possible in answering the question. Um, but one of the first things I try to do is format the CSV file as text. So I would say most of the time you're not going to have a problem with this, right? Most of the time you create a CSV file in Excel and it works just fine. Um, Sometimes I find that people will, put formulas into a column, or maybe they accidentally format it as something else, and then when they import it into Intact, it has a problem because what's in the cell is not actually a text format; it's something else. So this is like the first thing I always try. Sometimes it fixes things, sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes it was already text and there's something else wrong. Um, Another thing to check is for special characters in Notepad. I'll show you that in a second. But sometimes the issue is something that you can't see in Excel at all. And Notepad is really useful for troubleshooting stuff like that. Um, Make sure your date formats match. So, doesn't really matter what your date format is, whether it's month, day, year, or year, day, month. You need to make sure it matches when you're importing an intact. So if I go bring Intact back up and I go to the import, uh, if I'm importing AP bills, I'm selecting my date format here, right? So whatever your date format it is, again, that's user preference. Just make sure you're picking it here. So if you're using periods, that's fine. Just pick it here and match whatever is in your Excel file. Um, Back. Um, One other thing, all dimension reference need to be active and already exist in Intact. So if we're importing AP bills, your vendor dimension needs to exist in Intact, or your location dimension needs to exist in Intact before you can import things. And also your column headers uh, need to match the Intact field exactly. So on this last one, something that I find is useful sometimes is just to download the template again. Um, if you're using a template over and over, maybe uh, your fields somehow get changed while you're updating the spreadsheet. And sometimes it's good just to get a fresh template from Intact and use those column headers instead. One thing to note is there's no problem with adding uh, extra columns in here. So if you have columns that don't reference Intact, or if you just move these columns around into a different order, that's not going to cause an error um, because all Intact cares about is the correct spelling. So like if line number is spelled correctly here, and then between line number and account number, you have uh, a different column that just has nothing to do with Intact, Intact's just going to skip over it. It's just going to ignore it. That's totally fine. But what is important is that account number is spelled exactly as it is here, and line number is spelled exactly as it is here. And you get that from the import template from Intact. Um, so we were talking about special characters earlier. This import file will actually fail if I try to import it. And it has to do with something that you can't see here, right? I've got the proper date. My journal is something that exists in Intact. My department and my location are both things that exist in Intact, and my entry balances, right? 700 on both sides. So what's wrong? Why is Intact saying that I've got invalid values in here? Um, I take this file and I right click and open with Notepad. So CSV file is a text file, right? You can open with Notepad. Scroll down past the columns. Here's my data. Do you see this little question mark symbol here? Let me blow it up for you, make it a little bit easier to see. So that's a value, right? There's something there, some kind of undefined character here. This was a file that was like exported from another system. Um, So some of them are in this row before the 100, some of them are after the 100. So it's in my debits and credits column, and there's just something here. And if I go look in Excel, I can't see it, right? There's nothing in any of these. If I try to like highlight it here in the text box, I can see something's there, but I don't really know what it is. So it's invisible in Excel, but I can see it in Notepad. And I've seen this happen several times. So um, again, feel free to email us. We can do this for you if you provide us with the file. But if you ever run across an issue where you're just like, yeah, I don't know what's wrong, everything's text, um, everything looks like it should work, it all exists in intact, but intact is just throwing me an error that I don't understand, try opening it up in Notepad just to see if there's anything weird. And yeah, the way I would fix this is I would just, highlight all these columns and click the delete button, right? Um, that's a pretty easy fix. All right, next question. What does my transaction say it's pending after a conversion? So I've seen this one a couple times. This one's not super common, but it was interesting enough that I put it in here. This is what happens when you delete a line during the conversion and then recreate it with the exact same item and quantity and everything. So what usually happens is you've got some sort of sales order or purchase order, and you convert it to the next step, and then during the conversion, for whatever reason, you delete the line. Um, and then you say oops, and you recreate the line with item ABC with a quantity of 5, and then you just hit post, right? If you do that, the original transaction will say that it was not converted. And the reason for that is because Intact is treating this new line you created, even though everything is exactly the same, it is a brand new line that you added to the transaction during conversion. So you didn't technically convert the other line. Um, so what I recommend doing is if you find yourself in the middle of a conversion and you accidentally delete a line that you don't intend to, it's probably best just to start over. Um, and I can show you just right here. If I convert this to a sales invoice, so I've got a quantity of 1 for item 99001. I'm going to delete this 1, quantity of 1, same price, right? I'm going to click post. I need the location. All right. So back here on my sales order, still says Abstata pending, right? And it was because I never actually converted this specific item. If I scroll down, you can see quantity converted is 0. I'm not sure why that's not showing up. Might be a setting somewhere in this demo company. Anyway, this was not converted because I deleted the entry while I was converting it. So I technically converted a different line. Um, so that one's real simple. Just in the middle while you're while you're converting a transaction, if you ever delete something, just start over. If you didn't intend to delete that line. So if I'm deleting this, I just need to hit cancel. All right. This is a good one. Why doesn't my subledger tie to my general ledger anymore? So I would say 99.9% of the time, this is because a transaction exists in the general ledger that does not exist in the subledger. Um, so in this slide, I'm referencing something called a control account. What I mean by this is I'm talking about, accounts receivable, accounts payable, your inventory account, right? Those are your control accounts for those subledgers. Um, Something you should also consider control accounts is accounts created specifically to handle advances for AP and AR or overpayments for, I think AR only has overpayments. Um, so in those configurations, I go to AR configuration here. You can specify a specific account. Instead of using accounts receivable, I can specify a different account for overpayments and advances. So if you are taking those specific transactions to different accounts other than accounts receivable, you need to consider that whenever you are making or whenever you're reconciling your general ledger to your subledger. So let's say you've got 12,000 for your accounts receivable account and 12,001 for your advance account and 12,002 for overpayment. Whenever you reconcile AR to GL, you need to consider 12,000, 12,001, and 12,002. Otherwise, they're not going to match, right? Because the subledger is going to include these and your GL is not if you're only looking at the 12,000 account. Another thing to look at is uh, dimensionalizing these accounts. So for AP, I would recommend dimensionalizing by vendor. AR, you dimensionalize by customer. And inventory, I would dimensionalize by item and by warehouse. So this doesn't really solve any problems, right? It doesn't keep you from doing anything that you shouldn't be doing. But when something does go wrong, it makes it really easy to troubleshoot the problem. So let's say, you know, your accounts payable subledger no longer ties to your AP account in GL. Well, what you can do is you can go run a GL account by vendor to get all your vendor balances according to your GL, and you can go run an AP aging report in your subledger and just see which vendors don't match. Once you know what vendors don't match, now you've got an idea of what you should be looking for in the GL or the subledger to find which specific transactions are not matching up correctly. You can go from there to figure out what happened and how to solve it, right? So I highly recommend dimensionalizing all of these accounts by their appropriate dimensions um, and paying attention to those balances as well. Um, One of the best practices is to use the AR and AP ledger for reconciliation and not the aging. Um, Most of the time, these are going to be exactly the same. There are some specific scenarios where they're not, and I just highly recommend to always use the ledger. The ledger is always going to show you every single transaction that exists in the subledger. The aging sometimes will omit things. Um, there are ways to run the aging to give it so that it has more information or less information. But one key thing to remember is no matter how you run the aging, I think it never includes historical transactions. Um, so I always recommend just use the ledger. Uh, you know, we can talk about why they're different, but just use the ledger and you'll be fine. Another best practice is to lock your control accounts by using disable direct posting on the general ledger account. So let me show you what this is. If you go to general ledger and look at a general and look up 12,000 here. So I'm going to edit this. If I scroll down here, I have disallowed direct posting. I want to turn this on. So what this does is it does not allow humans to make entries directly to this GL account. So you want to do this after you've fixed your account, right? But once your account is fixed, check this box. And the only way anything gets posted to this account if it's coming from a subledger, right? So once I have this box checked, the only thing that will post to this is the AR subledger. And if the only thing posting to it is the AR subledger, then it will never be out of balance, right? Um, while you're here, another thing you can do is require dimension for customer. Um, for AP, you can require the vendor dimension, and for inventory, you can require item and warehouse, right? Um, so I highly recommend doing those things on your general ledger accounts. It just makes it really simple uh, to troubleshoot after the fact, and this is the thing that will keep you from messing up. I'd say the only time I wouldn't recommend checking that box is if you have some sort of external process going on. Um, but if you're using Intact and you want to tie Intact's subledger to Intact's GL, definitely check that box for all control accounts. So if we're talking about accounts receivable, also include uh, your advance accounts and your overpayment accounts. Next question. Why is my dashboard taking so long to load? So there's a reporting session coming up, and we'll talk a little bit about this there. But for dashboards, consider reducing the reports on screen or filtering for a smaller data set. So most of the things I'm going to talk about on this page have to do with your data set, right? If you're reporting on a very large data set, you're you're probably going to have issues running the reports. It's obviously going to take a little bit longer than a smaller data set. But if this is something that you've reported on without problems before, the data set isn't getting larger, um, then there might be something else going on, right? So first of all, for dashboards, we recommend about 15 reports on the screen at a time. Um, and if you're still having problems with 15, it's probably because one of those reports is larger. So a few strategies for that. One is filter the reports, right? Put a dashboard filter that makes it a smaller data set. Another strategy is to split it into larger, or sorry, split it into smaller groups, and you can have uh, groups of dashboards and then just flip between those dashboards, right? So you have one dashboard for some reports and another dashboard for more reports, and you just switch between those on the fly for whatever you're looking at. For individual reports, if it's a really large data set, you might consider running it offline instead of online. Um, and that's just because you can basically click a button, Intact will go start compiling the report, and it'll let you know when it's done, and then you can just go look at the report whenever it's done. Uh, this keeps your computer from having to use its own resources to try to generate this report uh, and show it to you on screen all at once. Um, if none of the above applies to you, like I was saying before, check the Sage status page for performance issues. Um, it could be that there's like a partial outage going on or system slowness. Definitely report it to us because if we get a bunch of reports in all at once, we know something's going on and we can let you know if other customers are having similar issues. Um, Also check if other Sage Intacct pages are slow to load. So if the entire website is being slow, it might not be your report. It might be the whole website. And then another thing I always like to recommend is to clear the browser cache and try again. So this is kind of like the browser version of have you tried turning it off and on again, right? Um, so whenever you're having performance issues, you might just try that, see if it fixes it. It won't always fix it, but sometimes it's just the magic bullet. All right. So I'm going to switch back over to you, Nikki. But this first question is, what is not a reason an import would error out? So it's a little bit of a quiz going on here. I put it in all caps, but I'll say it. There's a not in that question. So what would not be a reason for an import to have a problem? All right, looks like responses are slowing down. Oh, some coming in. I'll give it a couple minutes. All right, so the answer to this is D, including unnecessary column headers that Intech doesn't recognize. So I think I might have tricked you guys with a not, but basically, oh, if the data is formatted as text, right screen to share. If the data is not formatted as text, then it's going to throw an error. If the if the date format does not match, it is going to throw an error. If you reference a customer that doesn't exist in Intact, it is going to throw an error. The only thing that does not throw an error in this instance is column headers that Sage Intact doesn't recognize. Remember, with these, Intact is just going to ignore it. It's just going to skip it over. This makes it useful if you are exporting from another system and there's just extraneous data that Intact doesn't care about. You don't have to worry about that. Intact's just going to skip over it and it's not going to matter. Next question to turn. There we go. How do you prevent control accounts from slipping out of balance with subledgers?
While we're giving people some time to submit their answers, just a reminder that if you have any questions for Brian, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll throw those out to him in just a few minutes when we get to the Q&A period.
Yep. Looks like we're all in agreement here. If you check the disallow direct posting, once they're in balance, then they will stay in balance for the remainder of the period. So yeah, check the disallow direct posting, and you won't have problems. These others, using sub accounts, that's obviously not going to do anything. Uh, Designating different accounts for advances and overpayments, that's no problem. You can definitely do that, but you would also want to disallow direct posting on those as well. Making GL adjustments to force them to match each month. That's definitely something you can do, but that's like an indicator that something's going on each month, right? So if that is happening and you don't know why, definitely feel free to reach out to us and we can take a look at it. All right, and I'm a little bit early because I got nervous and talked real fast. So does anybody have any questions? Anything you thought I didn't cover or would like to cover? Or waiting for to see if there are any. My email is on the screen, bderosa@ddaftech.com, and I put the email for ERP support earlier. So if you have any questions about what I covered today, definitely feel free to reach out.